Hey, I'm Jeff Skversy. Today on Inside the Huddle, presented by Sportskeeda, I catch up with Brandon Scoop B. Robinson, an NBA insider for the Bally Sports Network. He's also been on CBS Radio. He's had an amazing career that started at the age of 12. Yeah, 12 years old, he got started with all this. He's done a lot of work as a host, a personality, executive producer. He's a podcaster, sports writer, and NBA insider. We'll talk NBA, the Brooklyn Nets, the Los Angeles Lakers, the Philadelphia 76ers, and much more. It'll be a busy offseason. We catch up with Brandon Scoop B. Robinson. Brandon, thanks for joining me. Should I call you Scoop B? What do you prefer?
Interchangeable.
Interchangeable. And so who gave you a nickname? Who gave you that nickname?
So I started in the business at 12, doing radio.
Which I love. I love. I read that about you. I love that you started at 12. That's amazing.
Thank you. I started on New York radio at 12, hosting a show called Net Slam Planet. It was on AM radio, now defunct Oswald Radio. And it was a show that was a Nets kids radio show, hosted with former Net Albert King, Lynn Wilson, who was a radio personality in the area, and Chris Carino, who's the Nets play-by-play guy on WFAN in New York. So basically Lynn Wilson I would do a segment called Nets Court, where I would go in the locker room, talk to players on both sides of the team, and then I would have a segment where we would just, kind of dissect everything. And Lynn goes, everything that's going on. She goes, every great has a nickname. I'm going to call you Scoop B. And kind of stuck. That was like 7th, 8th grade. In high school, I used that as my pen name for my column in the school newspaper. I went to 2 different high schools, and it just carried all through college, undergrad, right outside of Philly at Eastern, where you're based. And Scoop B kind of just stuck, and it's here to stay.
All right, so let's stick kind of there with the Nets. What in the world's going on in Brooklyn? Give me a scoop there.
From everything that I know, it's more along the lines of they want to stick together. It just has to make sense.
But what doesn't make sense? I mean, you think about Kyrie, Kevin Durant. Now they have Ben Simmons, who has yet to play with them, but
Philly's favorite, Ben Simmons.
favorite. I want to get into that too, because that situation drives me nuts. But specifically with Durant and Kyrie, what's the problem?
A couple things. A lot of it has to do, from what I understand, their leadership. When you look at even down to their coaching staff, Adam Harrington, who was a guy who is very closely tied to Kevin Durant. He's no longer an assistant coach, still paid, but gone. Eli Carter, who played AAU basketball in New Jersey with Kai, was an assistant coach, was not vaccinated, and the Nets let him go because of the New York City mandate. I'm told was assured that he would be back once New York kind of rolled back the mandates. Eli's not back. And it goes deeper than that. Kyrie opted into the player option, which will pay him $36.5 million next season. But feels as though he is due a longer term tender with Brooklyn, which would be somewhere in the 4 to 5 year range. And Kai and Kevin are a package deal. And this goes all the way back to, when Kevin was a member of the Warriors, Kai was a Celtic. So I spent some time with them during All-Star break in Charlotte in 2019 at Michael Jordan's party that he has every year. And, those guys were inseparable. Kevin drinking red wine, Kai drinking water, and, kind of them mapping out their future. But it's a 4-year partnership. People on Twitter get mad when I say this, but I think it was the late, great Kobe Bryant, a mainline native himself, who said, job not done. The 4-year partnership is not done. I believe that their best chance was 2 seasons ago when James Harden got hurt. He had a hammy issue. Kai hurt his ankle, and they ultimately lost to the eventual champs, the Bucks. And last season, the Celtics were supremely better, at least on defense. But I think that, the thing that is kind of interesting, in this situation for Kai, the Nets are a team that was an inception in 1967. They've had an identity crisis from Long Island to the swamps of East Rutherford to New Brunswick at Rutgers University to Newark to now the borough of Brooklyn. And I think one of the things that gets very troubled in this situation is, like, if you had somebody who wasn't from the New York metropolitan area, I don't think it would be such a tumultuous conversation, but he's somebody that's tied to the fabric of, being from New Jersey, his dad being from the Bronx, and him being a Nets fan himself. But I think that in this situation, I know actually that Kevin was very upset in how a lot was happening at one time. Kyrie's contract situation, and Kai missing out on $14 million for not playing home games last season. I don't think Kai last season was afraid to lose money, and I think he demonstrated that, but it seems as though he's being doubly taxed for his quote-unquote transgressions. He sat out. He didn't play. The Nets didn't even want him at away games because they didn't want that distraction. Then COVID happened and kind of ravaged through that team, and then they needed him because they were short players. So It's like now we go into the offseason, and he's getting punished again from that perspective, and something does have to give.
Is it beyond repairable? Is there a scenario that you see where it gets patched up and Durant and Irving are back in Brooklyn and they remain in Brooklyn?
Yes.
Do you think that's the most likely scenario where they stay as opposed to going who knows anywhere else?
Yes. For folks that I've spoken with, the Lakers was more of a manufactured idea from an organizational perspective.
How would they even fit all? I mean, how would the Lakers fit those salaries?
Well, the thing is with Kyrie, in order to make that work from a Nets organizational perspective, the Nets wanted 2 first-round picks, Russell Westbrook and Anthony Davis, and the Lakers didn't want to give up Anthony Davis in that scenario. But then the thing is, okay, if Kai had opted out, which he didn't, he would have had to get the $6 million mid-level exception, and he's given up $14 million last year. So he opted in to kind of, as the great DJ Khaled would say, secure the bag alert, secure the bag in doing so. But in order to make those contracts work, you'd have to move both Russell Westbrook, who was on the books to make, I believe, $47 million next season, because he opted in as well. But Anthony Davis and two picks would have to be part of it. And from my understanding, Rob Pelinka with the Lakers and also from Sean Marks' perspective, they were at a standstill. So then, some of those other conversations were happening as far as Kevin Durant, as it relates to, I know the Pelicans and the Nets were talking, and I know the Nets wanted a package that included Larry Nance, Brandon Ingram, and picks. The Pelicans are in the best situation because they have 6 first-round picks from trades that they did in the past with, the Lakers and the Bucks. And then you have, of course, the Suns, which could be any iteration of Cam Johnson, Devin Booker, and others. And I think in this situation for both Kevin and Kai, they're on the team they're supposed to be on.
Right.
I think that that's where they fit. And I think that the Nets and both Kai and Kevin need to kind of sit down and figure this thing out, because they need to be on this team, and they owe it to the franchise to get it right. It's a lot of frustration back and forth. I spoke to someone over the 4th of July weekend that actually was on the phone with Kev, and I asked him, he asked Kev what was going on, and Kev's like, I don't want to talk about it. Like, I think it was emotional or just informational overload. And I think people needed to kind of sit back and they need to figure this thing out.
So if those two are a package and it's not Brooklyn, where would you bet those two end up? Is there a surprise team? Could it be the Wizards with Bradley Beal? Could it be somewhere else out west, Portland? I'm throwing teams and names out there.
So in answer to your question, if on the Kyrie Irving side, it's been intimated to me that if he is moved, he would like to go west. And if we are to believe that, and the Lakers are a manufactured ESPN theoried machine, and no shade to ESPN, just, what it is. But I think the Clippers could be that surprise team, specifically because Kai's relationship with Ty Lue is not as murky as people think. Specifically, not just because they won a championship together, but because I know that Kai thinks the world of not just Ty Lue during his tenure in Cleveland, but also spending time with David Blatt. It didn't end well in Cleveland, but it wasn't Kai and Blatt's relationship. It was more just Blatt was very timid with that organization. He didn't really know how to handle LeBron. And then the other person that Kai, feels that he holds in high regard during his time in Cleveland was Byron Scott. But neither of those guys are active head coaches. Ty Lue is an active head coach and with the Clippers. And I know that they just brought in John Wall. I talked to John 2 days ago. John is very excited to get things started in the LA. I know they're saying it's been reported that he's going to have to compete for that starting job, but the only thing that makes sense to me at this point would be the Clippers. But I really do think that both, I think that's irrelevant because I do think that Kai and Kevin are going to figure this thing out.
All right, let's say they figure it out. Let's say you're on point with that, which is obviously an obvious scenario that, okay, they would stay there and work everything out. How does Ben Simmons fit into this picture? I mean, obviously things ended really poorly in Philadelphia. There were years of talks of Simmons not fitting in with Joel Embiid and finding the right fit, and Ben Simmons' desire to play. And there have been attacks on him as a human being. He's dealing obviously with some mental stuff going on. So how does Ben Simmons fit in Brooklyn, or does he fit in?
I think Ben Simmons solves a problem that the Nets had in the playoffs in round one against the Celtics.
But Ben's been terrible in the playoffs.
Yeah, but do you continue to punish somebody for their past transgressions? If somebody in your opinion is a bad person, not saying you think he's a bad person, but if somebody makes mistakes or somebody does something that's wrong, don't they as a human being have the right to fix it and move on and go on to the next thing? I understand that is a Philadelphia perspective, and I know that Philly 100
and absolutely 100%. And Ben, look, we're all human beings. Did he have a bad playoff series against the Atlanta Hawks? Absolutely. But I think it's the way it went down as if he quit. And so there's been talks where he quit on his team at LSU.
Right.
He quit on his team in Philadelphia. I've been doing this a long time. I've never in my life, in career, have seen an athlete really do what he did.
I think that kind of ties into the player empowerment that is today's NBA.
Well, yes, that's true.
And I also think that even goes back to the trendsetter in baseball that was Curt Flood and how he handled free agency. And if I'm not mistaken, took it all the way to the Supreme Court. If I'm not mistaken, but I think, and then to present day, within the last 10, 12 years where LeBron took his talents to South Beach, it took less money to win a championship with Wade, Bosh, and Moore. Now, the Nets did not win a championship, and if this is a 3-year situation in Brooklyn with Kai and Kevin, they brought in Ben Simmons. First of all, I'm of the belief that the Nets should have never gotten rid of Karis LeVert and Jared Allen. I think sometimes if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But specifically to your question about Ben Simmons, this is what I will say. I believe that Ben Simmons, number one, has a chance to get a fresh start. I think number two, if I could compare this to a movie, I literally need him to be Tom Hanks in Forrest Gump. I just need him to run, Forrest, run. I need him to run, play defense, and really be a playmaker in that system. Ben Simmons is a perfect fit from a positionless basketball that the Nets kind of have in this situation. He is a 6'10", 6'11" point guard that I think in this system doesn't have to take jumpers. And in my estimation, is a James Harden light. He takes less shots than James, and he really creates double teams and has the ability to thread the needle like Magic in his prime. I think playing along guys that are playing at a high level or who are all-stars and Kevin Durant. I know Kevin Durant was voted the top 75 player. Kyrie was not, but playing with 2 top 76 players in the league, because Kai deserves to be there. I do think that's going to rub off daily. I know a report that I put out back in the spring where I said that players in practice were challenging Ben Simmons, and someone within the Nets organization said he was walking around like Jordan. Well, we need that confidence of Jordan to reveal itself quick and very quickly in Brooklyn if they do have those aspirations. But I'm going to tell you something. The fact that the Celtics represented the Eastern Conference this year and the fact that the Bucks won last year, I kind of feel like the pressure is more on the 76ers as a favorite than the Nets, because I feel like some of this, the Nets are going to win it this season. Next, like, you kind of take attention off Brooklyn. The pressure is more on Boston, who added Brogdon and added Gallinari. And Brooklyn, I don't think people are expecting much at this point.
Right. The problem with Ben has always been in the playoffs where it's a little more half court
Mhm.
than it is during the regular season when you're running and gunning. The fact that he's not taking shots or willing to take jump shots, it doesn't keep the defense honest. And I think that's been an issue. And is it about Ben Simmons taking threes and this and that? No, but
No.
if the defense, Brad Stevens, 3-4 years ago, coach of the Celtics at the time, his plan to attack Ben Simmons defensively worked to perfection. They all backed up and said, okay, come on, Ben. And so he wouldn't shoot, which really then becomes about just really spacing and things like that. And in the playoffs, when every possession matters, it becomes a problem. And the fact that he won't take open shots has hurt the Sixers in the past. And so, yes, that's in the past, but going forward, having a guy wide open, you need him to at least take a few jump shots just to keep the defense honest, in my opinion.
Well, two things. One, Brad Stevens was the architect for a smash mouth defense in Boston that very much deserved to be in the finals this season, specifically because Marcus Smart is the defensive anchor on that team.
Sure.
And now that Ime Udoka took over, I'm knowing guys on that team and some of the things they shared, just how openly honest and being a former player, being a player's coach, I think that is going to work dividends for years to come. Specifically to Ben Simmons, though, forgive me, I'm a bit old school in that the point guard's job is to distribute and get people open. However, I think that I think he's in a good, less pressured situation from the jumper perspective, where I believe that driving to the basket is really his friend. I remember talking to Brett Brown in his last season as coach of the Sixers, and I noticed how he began to move Ben kind of off the ball. And you implemented Shake Milton as the starting point guard, and you kind of shifted Ben stylistically to the three, and in theory, Tobias Harris to the four. And I had this conversation with Brett. It seemed as though Philly began to use Ben Simmons at the three position in the same way that Eric Spoelstra began to transition LeBron off the ball in Miami system. And he felt that was an interesting assessment. And I feel like in Brooklyn, you're going to see him do both of those things. I think you're going to see him as a primary ball handler. I believe Kyrie Irving and Steph Curry are two of the best people who can create their own shots. But one thing that Steph and Kai have in common is they have small forward, power forward distributors on their roster. Steph is a point guard by definition, but really Draymond Green is the point guard of that Warriors team. Comparatively, I look at Ben Simmons. I think he's a better scorer than Draymond just at this point in his career. Ben Simmons is like 25 years old, so I think he has time. But I just think the way Ben Simmons is used, I think he's a rarity in today's game. I think the only person in today's NBA skill set, not talent-wise, skill set that I can compare him to at this point is LeBron. I think it's how you use Ben Simmons. I think using Ben Simmons as a de facto point guard in that situation is going to allow Kyrie Irving to get better open shots, drive to the basket, and concurrently, Kyrie can do the same thing for both Kevin and Ben, because Kevin Durant is a rhythm shooter. He's not a distributor. And I think when you're playing under a point guard who is now a head coach in Steve Nash, I think sometimes you clash because your point guards and your coach, who's a former point guard, they often clash because they played the same position. I saw that in Brooklyn with Avery Johnson and Darren Williams. I think in this situation, Ben Simmons is going to have to be used as the de facto point guard.
Let's talk about the Lakers. Can they turn this around? I mean, LeBron's up there in age, Anthony Davis, Russell Westbrook, is he in their plans? The way the Lakers are constructed today, of course, a lot can change, but do you look at this kind of, three-headed monster in LA as a team that can quickly, be a powerhouse again in LA and out West, because obviously Golden State's not going anywhere with that firepower.
Golden State's not going anywhere. Neither is the Memphis Grizzlies, and neither are the Dallas Mavericks or the Phoenix Suns, with or without DeAndre Ayton. And so when I look at this Lakers team, I think the one thing that, people who I know within the Lakers organization have lamented to me is, last season, COVID kicked their butts. Anthony Davis being hurt, as well as LeBron being hurt, kicked their butts. And Frank Vogel and Russell Westbrook never clicked. When I look at this Lakers team, having some downtime, having some off time, and kind of recalibrating for an 82 game season, I think the Lakers have a chance to be competitive in the Western Conference. But as you mentioned, the Warriors are the champs. And there are some younger teams like the Grizzlies who aren't afraid of the Lakers.
Right. And so is there a name out there from what you're hearing that the Lakers have that LA, that Laker thing that guys want to go out to LA and play there? But is there a name out there that you go, okay, I'm hearing that could go to Los Angeles and join that team somehow?
I think Miles Turner would make sense, but what do you give up for that? Right. I also think that, I know that just like the Sixers, the Lakers for years have salivated over Buddy Hield. But to be honest with you, I think Buddy Hield fits in Indiana like a glove, specifically because you have Tyrese Halliburton, who I think is the future of the NBA. At the point guard position, just the way he plays the game. He has you'll appreciate this being in Philly. He reminds me so much of Andre Miller. Right. Just the way he gets open shots, but can create his own shot. And if I'm Indiana, DeAndre Ayton is who I'm guaranteeing a contract with. I think that's the modest Sabonis trade with the Sacramento Kings was both beneficial for both Sacramento and the Pacers. So if the Pacers are looking to move on and they can get DeAndre Ayton and they move Miles Turner to Los Angeles, that would make sense. Now, if you do that, you'd have to create a package that would likely include Talen Horton-Tucker, who the Lakers have been dangling around for years. I know when the Washington Wizards and the Lakers were discussing Russell Westbrook last year, the Lakers were dangling not just Kyle Kuzma, but Talen Horton-Tucker and more. So those are the names that you hear. Miles Turner, specifically if the Pacers are able to nab DeAndre Ayton via free agency. He is a restricted free agent, so the Suns do have the chance to match him. So I think that's a name you should be paying attention to if you're the Lakers. Miles Turner.
Miles Turner, obviously a good name, could complement LeBron, Anthony Davis, Russell Westbrook, assuming West stays out there. I mean, do you envision Westbrook staying in Los Angeles?
Yeah, his contract is very difficult to move. I know that early in the playoffs and after the season, I know Charlotte was a name that was discussed quite a bit. I think Charlotte is quite set with LaMelo Ball at point guard. I think it would be a kind of a situation if Charlotte were to get him, a situation where he'd play mentor, but I don't even think that that's realistic at this point, specifically because of how much he'll be making next season. That $47 million is difficult to move.
Yeah. The national perspective on the Philadelphia 76ers is what?
That they are the Philadelphia Rockets. You brought in Daryl Morey, who was an executive with the Rockets. You brought Tad Carper, who replaced Scott O'Neil as the CEO of Harris Blitzer with the Devils and the Sixers, and then you trade to get James Harden at the trade deadline, and then you bring in Daniel House. You also bring in PJ Tucker, and I thought it was quite genius that after the Sixers lost to the Heat in the playoffs, that you heard Embiid make that plea that PJ Tucker would be a good fit for them. I think the Sixers did a good job of bringing in PJ Tucker and still not ridding themselves of Tobias Harris, because I think that in basketball terms, it's too many nice guys on that team. You need some jerks on that team. And
well,
PJ,
that's exactly
mm-hmm.
That's exactly what they need. They need toughness, and Embiid has talked about that publicly and privately, that they need some toughness. And look, Tobias is kind of the forgotten guy here when you have Harden and Embiid, when you had Simmons all those years. But look, I mean, I still think there's some wondering what if, because Joel Embiid really wanted Jimmy Butler to stay. And there was parts of Butler that wanted to stay here. I still think he wanted to go to Miami. And there were some issues at the time with Simmons and Brett Brown and things like that. But you wonder what if. I mean, Jimmy Butler's kind of that killer instinct player, that tough guy that you need to close out games that you would have needed in Philadelphia.
It was also Jimmy and Brett Brown.
Yeah.
Them class. And the same could be said for JJ Redick. And they ultimately chose Tobias over both. And Miami was the place he wanted to be, but there was a part of Jimmy. I feel like I'll use this analogy, you'll get it. I feel like Patrick Beverley for Minnesota the Timberwolves this past season is what we thought Jimmy Butler would be for Philly.
Right.
That player that is a firecracker, that's able to just ignite players to get them going. I know you heard the story about how Jimmy Butler played a game, a play. It was 1-on-4 or 1-on-5 in practice against his Timberwolves teammates, and he had on a Rolex watch and kicked their ASS on the court while wearing a Rolex. That's the kind of guy I want getting into a fight in an alleyway with me. Not afraid to get dirty, not afraid to get his face scratched, but goes out there and battles. And you definitely imagine what if Kawhi Leonard didn't hit that big shot in 2019 against the Sixers in the playoffs, which ultimately propelled them to beat the Warriors.
But I still think, and I agree with that, but I still think the Raptors were the better team that year. And I know it came down to that. They were still the better team. And, there were it seems like with the Sixers, there's the same old story. Embiid's health, closing out games, managing those final seconds, those final minutes of a fourth quarter of a regular season game, let alone a playoff game, are still issues the Sixers need to work.
But you know what? I'll tell you what I do enjoy about this Sixers team that I have to get kind of zero in on. I spoke with Tyrese Maxey about a month ago, and he, this is an ongoing conversation he and I have had. He told me that, Sam Cassell told him, assistant coach Sam Cassell, that once you learn how to win the score, when to distribute, you'll be a great point guard. And I asked him, kind of reverting back to that assessment, when it really clicked. And he said it actually clicked when James came to the Sixers. I really think that Tyrese, James, and Embiid, because they more so James and Embiid, because they demand the ball so much in their hand for their skill set, figuring it out with a actual point guard in Tyrese Maxey, having a half a season in the playoffs to figure it out, and then having a whole season to figure it out. And then you bring back George Niang and some of those other guys. I really think that the Sixers with Doc Rivers deserve a chance to run it back again. And I think that this season, adding PJ Tucker gives them that opportunity to add some things, but be great.
I agree. And I think Embiid's health is always a question mark, and is always kind of that dangling, is he going to be healthy? And look, it's not the foot, it's not necessarily the knee anymore. It's just being healthy. And some guys have not been able to shed that injury issue in their career in any sport. And I think it'll really come down to that. Can Embiid stay healthy? Can he not turn the ball over when they hand him the ball in that crunch moment? And I think that's what's going to come down to. But if Brooklyn's going to be stacked, Milwaukee, I'm not counting them out.
Yeah.
And so you look at that and you go Miami, and you go, there's no team that I go as a clear-cut favorite here in the East.
I like it like that.
I do
like
too.
The NCAA tournament.
It is. And I guess there's going to be maybe a play-in tournament too, right?
Yeah, man.
I don't know how I feel about that. It feels a lot like soccer.
Basketball is not just positions 1 through 5 anymore. It's there is a soccer feel to it. You got advertisers on the jerseys, and you have guys that have footwork like soccer players. And basketball is inching towards being the number 1 sport in the United States. So with great power, as they say on Spider-Man, comes great responsibility.
All right, last thing for you. It's a long off season. What do you think the biggest scoop is going to be this year, Scoop?
Where Donovan Mitchell goes ultimately.
And where do you think that'll be?
The New York Knicks.
Okay. Teaming up with Jalen Brunson.
Villanova's own Jalen Brunson.
That's right. Scoop, it was a pleasure. I appreciate you joining me. Thanks for the insight. Always interesting to read and to watch, and I appreciate it.
Brother, thank you for the opportunity to be myself.
Take care.
You too.
It was great catching up with Scoop B. Robinson. Be sure to check out his website, scoopb.com. If you like the show, click on the subscribe button at the bottom of your screen. Also, hit the bell button on YouTube, and I'll send you an alert when we drop the next episode. You can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all your favorite podcast apps. Just click on the links in the description below. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on Inside the Huddle with Jeff Skversy, presented by Sportskeeda.